Welcome to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. With me today on a very important podcast is Todd Vandermyde. Todd Vandermyde, I first met in 2013 when I was a brand new state rep, and he was the NRA lobbyist down in Springfield. At that time, we were under court order by the Seventh Circuit to pass concealed carry legislation as the last state in the union to have such laws in effect. So I got to know Todd very well through that process and in continuing years. Todd later on went on to represent firearm dealers. And he just recently testified in a hearing in Springfield about this latest gun grab legislation brought forward by State Representative Bob Morgan, who represents Highland Park. Now, we're going to have this full discussion about that legislation, and Todd is, I want people to know up front, he's very good. He's very precise with the language that he uses, which is really important because these legislators throw around terms that they have no idea what it means. And Todd catches them all the time. I listened, Todd, recently to your own YouTube channel. And in fact, if you want to tell everybody what your YouTube channel is where they can follow your information, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's called Freedom's Steel. Freedom apostrophe S, Steel, S-T-E-E-L. And the name comes from a play on things between the 2A advocacy. I also am a retired operating engineer, so I ran a bulldozer and all kinds of heavy equipment, and it's just a play on all of that for me.
Very good. I really like that name. Yeah, Freedom's Steel. That's awesome.
Well, we're working on some new logos and some stuff like that. So when we get to that, there'll probably be a picture of me in my tactical gear in front of a big old D8 dozer and everything. So
right, because steel from the firearms perspective of protecting 2A, and freedom from the fact that we have a lot of folks that push dirt around and actually create the jobs and the economic activity to give you the freedom that you need to make a living, right?
Well, it's just that we're going to back up what we say with a D8. There's a bunch of things there that that go along with it, but yeah, well, that's it. And it's growing. We've broken 2,000 subscribers. We've hit over 5,000 view hours this past week. I've got a couple more updates I'm going to try to be pushing up there and everything. So no, we appreciate the plug.
Well, terrific, because part of what I was listening to was your discussion about the Naperville legislation, or attempt to basically ban quote unquote assault weapons sales in the city limits of Naperville. And I was listening to that discussion. You were very, very technical in it, which is really important to do, because you talked about they say in common use, unusual and uncommon, right? Or commonly used and unusual. Or well, no, I'm sorry, dangerous. No.
Correct.
How did that go? I'm getting mixed up myself about it.
That's okay. So in the Heller decision in 2008, the court put down certain markers. They talked about firearms that are in common use are protected. They sat there and when they delineated out the things that might be regulated or banned, they talked about dangerous and unusual. Now, as we follow this legislation, nothing happens, or court cases, nothing happens in a vacuum. So the other part of what comes out of the New York carry case, and I had this argument with some of your former colleagues, and they still don't grasp it.
This is the Brewing case that was just recently decided, correct?
Well, yeah. It's New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin. Everybody shortens it to Bruin. I believe that New York State Rifle and Pistol Association should get the due for what they are and not the Attorney General. So I always call it New York.
Okay.
But everybody thought, well, it's just a carry case. And all of us that were working at a different level are saying, no, what the court needs to do is once and for all, they need to issue a test. They need to clear up what the standard of review is when you're dealing with these issues. And for years, there was a two-part test that largely emanated out of the Seventh Circuit here from the Ezell case, Ezell 1, which was about a ban, Chicago banning ranges within the city limits, indoor, outdoor, it didn't matter. If it wasn't for a security firm or the police department, they didn't want civilian ranges in the city. They were continuing to stamp their feet after losing the McDonald decision. And so what happened was they came up with this two-part test. And I had argued for over a decade the test was wrong. What we should have been doing, we should have been arguing page 62 and 63 out of the Heller decision that said, we know of no other enumerated right that is subject to a freestanding interest balancing approach. And that's all tiers of scrutiny are. They're interest balancing,
Oops. Hang on here.
rational basis, intermediate scrutiny, strict scrutiny is all interest balancing. And so what happened was the court in New York rejected any interest balancing approach. And where we were losing in courts around the country was on this interest balancing approach. They all kind of threw out rational basis, which means any reason the government gives is good enough. And then strict scrutiny was the highest level, to where they have to have the least restrictive means of accomplishing what they want to do, and they have to have a darn good reason to do it. Intermediate is like in between all that. And the courts were shoehorning intermediate scrutiny into anything and making most of the gun control schemes, the gun bans, fit within that. Now, California, in the Miller decision, Judge Benitez ruled semi-auto ban unconstitutional. In the Duncan case, ruled the magazine ban unconstitutional. Court of Appeals, Ninth Circuit, upheld the district court decisions. And then, as always in California, they go en banc to a full panel, and the en banc court overruled the three-judge panel. And so the magazine case was pending up at the Supreme Court when New York was decided. Now you had two magazine cases, and you had a semi-auto ban and a carry case out of Hawaii. All four cases by the Supreme Court were granted, they were accepted. They vacated the rulings and say these anti-gun rulings, poof, gone. Snap of the finger, Thanos, gone. And so they sent them back to the lower courts, say, try again, see New York. And so they did that. So that's where we are today. And that is the backdrop that the Illinois legislature is now up against with things like 5855.
Sure. So 5855 raises the FOID age, unless you're military, to 21 instead of 18. It bans certain commonly used guns, what they call quote unquote assault guns. It bans magazines over 10 rounds, and it mandates basically a gun registration, right?
Yep.
So all of this stuff, all this stuff has already been, pretty much adjudicated by the Supreme Court. What are they trying to do here? It's got to be nothing more than virtue signaling to what they think is their popular base that they represent.
Well, I think they have two things. I think one, part of it's virtue signaling, but some of this stuff has not been tested. And
like a gun registration? Like a gun registration?
That's not made it to the Supreme Court yet.
Okay.
That has not been tested. Just like the permit to purchase stuff that they enacted in Measure 114 in Oregon, or our FOID card, has not been fully tested in front of the Supreme Court. So what we've got here, but we have a new test. And the test is, does the plain text and language of the Second Amendment cover the conduct being regulated? Yes or no? If it does, the conduct is presumptively protected, and therefore it is the burden of the government to show that there was a similar regulation in 1791 that regulated that this was the historical tradition based on the text of the Second Amendment, and that this goes back, just like the 4th of July is Independence Day, that this goes into the history and tradition of the United States. And if not, then the regulation or the law, or whatever you want to call it, the restriction, is unconstitutional. And they're trying to boot. So this is where, when you said dangerous or unusual, so the anti-gunners are playing on words. The test in Heller was dangerous and unusual. We can play some Schoolhouse Rock for these guys if they need it. Conjunction Junction. I mean, I still remember that stuff, but they're trying to say dangerous or unusual. Then they're using this new phrase, unusually dangerous.
Right.
And they keep trying.
Yep. They conflate the language to serve their needs and to confuse people.
Right. They're trying, they're on the border of lying in front of the court as to what the decision says, and they are misrepresenting. And then the other thing,
so their argument, for argument's sake, is that AR-15s were not a commonly used weapon back in 1791, and therefore, why should we allow those to be used now? They're much more powerful. They're much more, easier to fire off multiple rounds within a minute. And so it's not something that the common person should have.
And it doesn't matter because the ruling in Heller said that, some have made the argument bordering on the frivolous that only those arms in existence in the 18th century are protected. We do not view constitutional rights that way.
No, we
and
don't.
If you jump, based on the way Representative Stonebeck and others would argue it, the First Amendment would only apply to the soapbox, the spoken word, the printing press, and the quill pen. The internet, TV, radio would not be protected. That's not how we view these things.
Yeah.
And so what they also like to forget is in 2016, there was another Second Amendment case. It's called Catano versus Massachusetts. It did not get a lot of play. But what it was is a woman was criminally charged for having a stun gun in her purse. And it went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And there were two things that came out of that case. One, stun guns are protected arms under the Second Amendment. Now, going back to in common use, does anybody reasonably believe that the founding fathers, even though Ben Franklin with his kite was out there trying to figure out electricity, envisioned electrically discharged stun guns as defensive weapons back in the day? No,
but maybe they had hammers.
But the Supreme Court said that stun guns are protected arms under the Second Amendment. And Justice Alito, in a concurring opinion, said that 200,000 stun guns nationally was enough to make them in common use. And the other side, we've seen this in a couple of pleadings, are trying to argue different numbers, and they're trying to jack those numbers up to argue what in common use is. And so I don't, you can go back to Heller, but they've cleared part of this up in 2016 saying, hey,
So let's move on here a little bit. Okay, first of all, I think it's great because you skewered them in the committee hearing, and if people want to watch that, I think that we can put up a clip of that. I know that you've got a clip up on your Facebook site and all that stuff. So I actually don't even think that we should be talking about any of this. I think that if they want to pass this, it will go through the court system. Will cost a lot of money. I've heard that you believe that they don't have the votes to pass this in veto session, which, by the way, they're trying to do again what they did with the Safety Act. They're trying to pass this with lame duck legislators during lame duck sessions. These are legislators who are never going to return. They're not coming back at all, so they're just going to make a vote for whatever purposes that they want to make the vote. Now, you are saying that you don't think that they have the votes right now. Let's talk about that right now.
No, that's not exactly what I said. What I have talked about is there's been a question as to whether or not they can get this through the lame duck session. I do not believe, as 5855 is written right now, that they can get that exact bill through the legislature. I think the Senate has some serious sticking points. Hell, the other day, you had the Sun-Times come out and say the magazine portion is completely unworkable. When you got the Chicago Sun-Times saying that,
good point.
Justin Slaughter has said this thing's not ready to land. So do I think they can cobble the votes together to pass something in the lame duck? Yes. Do I think it's going to be 58-55 as written? No. That's where I think we are. We've also gotten word, the Sun Times has publicly said that the Senate is working on its own bill.
Right.
So the real question becomes, how much coordination is there between the House and Senate? How much are Harmon, the Senate president, and Welch, the Speaker of the House, working together and in cahoots and in sync on this? Because we had the governor come out and say, well, if we get it done in the
Hmm.
spring, that's good enough. I think when the governor made that statement, he is out there looking to try to get a bill in the spring, which he could then sign right in front of the 1 year anniversary of Highland Park in furtherances of any national ambitions he may have. That's just the cynic in me. But, they are working on something. We don't know what it is. We don't know how broad based it is. I think the red flag stuff, the age space stuff, the sales in the magazines are the four major components that you're going to see. What they end up looking like. They've gotten smarter in things that they've been doing as they've listened to our arguments over the years. And you can see like where they have an exemption for lever action rifles and 22 rim fires, that those are all based on previous testimony that I've given. And finally, somebody is starting to look at this
Right.
and
Yeah, but
pick up.
yeah. So what do you think happens with the magazine ban, for example? Do you think that goes away? Because I just qualified, I just renewed my CCL license, and I was firing my own pistol, and it's got a 12-round magazine. I mean, what you just like you can't just get rid of that. You just don't get rid of your gun that you bought. It's
No,
ridiculous.
they're going to do something. I just, the question is, how married are they to certain things? And like you said, we're not talking about this. One of the things that we agreed to as groups was that we're not going to educate them. I'm not here, as I told, we're not here to negotiate. We're here to
That's
tell
right.
you no. And the
Okay.
point is, pass whatever god awful, piece of garbage you can, and then we will see you in court. Because the worse they make it, the better off it is for us in court. We're not teaching them where all the pitfalls of their bills are. We're not, or whatever they've cobbled together. So we don't know how married they are to certain things that are in the bill right now. We see things in the bill and we know what they mean.
Are
They
there
don't.
any squishy Republicans that are willing to negotiate with the Democrats on this bill?
I don't know if
You don't
there's
have
any.
to name names. Do you think that there are any?
I think there are some. I think that there could be two squishy Republicans who could vote for something depending on how it's written. And I'll call out Jim Durkin. Jim Durkin sat in on the first hearing that the
Hmm.
committee had with everything, and he's been sounding off, and he tried to play this game in the media by being too cute by half by, well, we could vote for something. It's like, why? You,
Why?
you, you just sit here and alienated
Okay,
a
so
large chunk of your base.
let's go to the why, because I think this is the most important argument that that conservatives and people who care about the 2A rights need to make. There's a couple different whys. Like, why are you doing this? Do you really firmly believe this solves gang violence? Do you really firmly believe this solves deranged shooters that want to get a weapon and shoot up a parade full of people? I mean, do they really believe that this solves the thing that they're trying to solve? If they do, I disagree. In large part,
All
look
right.
at
So,
Highland. Look at Highland, right? We had a red flag law. They were like the only city to have an assault weapons quote unquote ban. Right? I mean, they have every
well,
liberal
they were,
program available to this misguided youth to solve his mental health issues. They had everything available to them. It failed miserably,
correct.
including their own
And so,
police departments. Why do they think this is going to solve anything? That's the problem. They should be put on record. Tell me how this solves the gang violence. Especially, you've got Representative Ford, who represents the west side of Chicago. And you tell me, Representative Ford, how this solves your gang violence problem.
no, I agree with you on that point. The question is, who are you asking the question of? Are you asking of any Republican that's looking at this? Or are you asking it of the Democrats in general.
Everybody
Because,
should be asked this question. Everybody, every voter, every media outlet, every Democrat who's going to vote on this, every Republican, they should be asking, how does this solve anything?
And it does that, and that was part of the point I was trying to make in my testimony. Is I had 2 points to go in there. One, I'm going to show you legally you're wrong. Two, how are you going to enforce this? That just doesn't work. How are you going to enforce? 2.5 million people have FOID cards in this state. How are you going to do? If every person has 3 magazines for a pistol, you're looking at 7.5 million magazines. Most guys that own ARs own at least 10 magazines.
Mm-hmm.
If half the FOID card holders own or follow that formula that I'm familiar with, you're looking at 12.5 million magazines. There are tens of millions of magazines in this state. How are you going to regulate that? And as one police officer I know told me, he said, Todd, you're telling me I potentially have to arrest the people I go to church with, the people that are in my neighborhood, the people that come over to barbecue at my house, the guys at the bar that I drink beer with, the people, the families that are on my son's sports teams. These people all become criminals the way this is. So we have heard that some of the Black Caucus people are having some issues with the penalties that are in this bill. So again, how are you going to enforce this? Because you're going after 2.5 million people on the front side that are Illinois residents. I don't see how this. You had a handgun ban in Chicago. Did it stop the gangs? No. You sat there and had a semi-auto ban in Chicago. Did it stop the gangs? No. You've got a magazine ban in the city of Chicago. No, they're showing up with Glocks with illegal full auto switches. So how do you address that? Because you're coming after us. We're the low-hanging fruit because you've got a list of the 2.5 million people. And my question to them is, what are you going to do when we prevail in court and the FOID card goes away and we force you to burn that list? You no longer have this little panacea of a FOID card to fall back on.
It's just so offensive. It's so offensive that they are going after legal gun owners and they will not address the real issues of gang crime. I mean, you've got unabetted. I mean, just full scale. You've got these criminal cartels, not just at the southern border. They're operating in Chicago too, and they've got control of the streets, and people are afraid. They've got control of the CTA. I mean, and they won't enforce the laws that we already have. It's just criminal. Here's the other question: do these guys not look at what's happening in other states? Now, I'll be honest with you. I think it was in 2021 or maybe it was 2020, Virginia was going through this whole hullabaloo as well about what to do with their gun legislations. And you had a lot of 2A defenders showing up at Virginia's Capitol saying, you're not doing this. We're not doing it. And I started to look into it, and I started to read what the Democrats wanted to do in Virginia. Well, they wanted their own version of like a FOID card. Mm-hmm. I was like, we already have that. So here's the other problem with this whole discussion. People are up in arms. Literally, they were showing up with their weapons, full display in Virginia, saying, you're not taking my gun. You're not making me go through another hoop. You're not making me go through a FOID card registration. And we have sat here as Illinoisans and put up with it. Meanwhile, other states, you got constitutional carry. You can walk in and walk out with a gun that day. You've got all this stuff going on, and they're just as safe. They're just as safe.
Right. So, Jeannie, the problem here is, first off, Virginia is an open carry state. Whether it's a rifle or a handgun, they're an open carry state.
Well, that's not a problem for me, but yeah.
I'm not. Yeah. If our guys show up with rifles across their chests at the Capitol, we're going to be arrested.
No, they can't. My point is like the discrepancy between the state laws is so vast that these states, but the Illinois state legislators don't even understand what the world is like outside of our borders when it comes to 2A laws. I mean, they're nuts. They're nuts.
Go to Indiana, go to Missouri, go to they don't get all that. So
I mean, do they
The
think
point,
that Virginia's dangerous? Why do they go to Indiana? Are they showing up in Florida to go vacation? Do they feel unsafe in Texas? Well, why don't, I mean, are you going to go across the border to Iowa, or is it so unsafe because they have all of these 2A rights that we just can't allow that in the state of Illinois? I mean, what are these folks smoking?
a bunch of the weed they passed to
Yeah,
legalize. I don't
apparently.
know. I mean, the issue is that they you're applying logic to an emotional argument.
Yeah.
All they have is an emotional argument, because when Representative Stoneback came after me in the committee hearing, the minute I could rebut what she wants to say, I wanted her to give me more questions. I was, and I'll tell you what, right now, Representative Stoneback, if you want to have an open debate about the Second Amendment and any aspects of gun control, anything you want to propose, I'll let you pick the moderator, you pick the venue, and I'll show up. You want it in Highland Park? You want it in Skokie, Evanston? I'll show up and I'll debate you a mano a mano. Bring three other state reps if you want, and I'll go against all you. Bring Morgan, a lawyer. I'll go up again. I'm just an accidental lobbyist and a bulldozer operator. What do I possibly know? But you know what? You had to pass a carry law because of my lawsuit. So you know what? I'll take those odds. I thought it was fair odds. There were 4 of them on the committee against me. Hey, like Rush Limbaugh, I'll do that with half my brain tied behind my back.
Yeah, well, the other thing, you talk about the concealed carry law that was passed. I mean, I think it's important to remind these state legislators about why that was passed. What happened to Mary Shepard here in Illinois that
she was
caused that
beaten within an
legislation?
inch of her life in a church.
Mm-hmm.
And she had carry licenses from more than one state,
Yep.
was proficient, took training, and was beaten to within an inch of her life by one of Pat Quinn's parolees. And that was it. And so I don't remember your tenure. Were you in the legislature the year prior to that, or did you get there?
I got there in 2013, January 2013.
Okay.
So we were under court order at that point, and we had to have it passed
So
by June.
the year prior, we tried passing a carry law. We negotiated, worked with the law enforcement groups, did everything. And Brandon Phelps, he says, Todd, what do I say to close? I said, Brandon, here's what you tell your colleagues. You tell them you can either vote for this and pass this, or we're going to court. And when we go to court and we win, you're not going to like what you have to vote for then. That's what he said in the closing arguments, and that's exactly what happened. We sat there and came back, and we got a carry law that they're still bent out of shape about. But my goal over the next 24 months is working through various groups, my gun club, the Aurora Sportsman's Club, FFL Illinois, the Dealers Association, working with Gun Saves Lives, I4, and a bunch of other groups.
Yep.
Is the plan is to force feed Heller down the throats of the legislature, and then give them a second dose of the New York decision and force them into compliance. If they pass anything like what they have introduced in 58-55, we're going to court, and we are going to pummel them, and we're going to beat on them, and we're going to sit there and force them, as a chief judge said in oral arguments here in Chicago not too long ago, the Second Amendment has gone from a second class right to a supercharged right. And I plan, tell you what, I'll sit there and light it, bring it. I am not afraid of this fight at all, because now it's for all the marbles. The real question is going to be, can they pass something? Can they write something and get it passed in the lame duck session? And then we'll be in court pronto. And if they can, then what else goes on the wish list for the next session? Obviously, Stonebeck isn't going to be there because she lost a primary.
Yep.
But there's plenty of other nitwits that are going to be around to just dream up whatever. The anti-gunners are getting smarter in the way they propose some things, but I don't think it's going to be enough to save them. We're ready and willing to go to court, and I have a whole list.
Well, listen, there's a secondary issue here, and as much as I love beating these guys up about their own unconstitutional laws, and I think obviously it's going to go to court. I'm sick and tired, though, of voters being so uninformed about core constitutional rights that they want to infringe on other people. I'm just tired of it, because all the Democrats are going to do now then is use this as another campaign issue. Just like they don't really want to pass. Like, let's say the legislator did on abortion. Okay, let's say on abortion, they said, okay, we're doing a 15-week ban on abortion, which is actually where a supermajority of Illinois residents are pro-life or pro-Democrat. They believe in restrictions. If they passed that and took that away as a issue in a campaign, the Democrats would hate it. It's the same thing with guns. They love to have this issue around so that they can campaign on it. That's what it's become. It's been campaign issues rather than good public policy and constitutional laws. And that's what I find so offensive about them, is because this is just for naught. This is just, it's just busy work. It's a time suck that distracts from every other thing that we should be talking about in this state, like growing jobs. It's fine. By the way, I wanted to point this out before we let you go. You can go to fflil.org and you can donate there. And all donations from December 22nd until further notice are going to be allocated to battling bills like HB 5855, because we are going to have to, interest groups are going to have to sue in court, I believe, over this. And so that takes money. So people should go to fflil.org and donate there for the fight.
No, that's absolutely true. And to get around, I think it's time. So during this whole police reform movement we've been having a discussion over for the last 2 years, there has been this notion of removing qualified immunity from law enforcement officers. I think it's time to figure out, how do you bring about the legal challenge to start suing individual legislators for violation of their oath and for passing or trying to infringe on our rights? Because to be honest with you, in my world, I see no difference between Stoneback, Hirschauer, or Morgan than Bull Connor. Bull Connor did it with fire hoses and dogs back in the day. They're just trying to do it with a pen. And they're just trying to do it in some nice and tidy way. And I think people are growing, just like you said, people are growing fed up with the fact that we've been to the Supreme Court of the United States 4 times. We have prevailed 4 times, and they continually just thumb their nose at it, and they don't have to do anything. And they can keep doing it because there's no penalty to consequence. It's like a guy carrying a gun in Chicago that Kim Foxx lets out on an I-bond and an ankle monitor, and he keeps continuing to do it. Or the carjackers, there's no penalties. And because of that, so until we can figure out either, and I don't have a big faith in the electric in this state, because
I don't either.
They just keep going. They keep taking whatever. We have to do something. We have to do something. Well, your something does not begin with the infringement on fundamental constitutional rights against law-abiding citizens, because we're going to have a Rosa Parks moment if this thing goes through all the way and they want to start this. You are going to have people who say, I'm not registering anything. I'm not surrendering anything. That's it. Come and get it. You want that fight? Bring it on, because there are a lot of them, and people are just that fed up. West of 47 and south of I-80, what do you think it's going to be like? You have 70 sanctuary counties. Iroquois County, Effingham County.
I completely forgot about that. Yep, sanctuary counties for gun rights.
Well, no, but the new wrinkle in that is Iroquois County, Effingham are passing resolutions at the county board level saying no county resources can be used in the enforcement of any of these acts. No sheriff's deputies, no squad cars, no money. I mean, technically it could go as far as you can't prosecute these people. So how, to my question, how are you going to enforce this? How are you? And that's the question they need to be made to answer.
Well, it goes
back. How are you going to do it?
Well, it goes back to, they don't care about passing the law. They care about winning the media argument for their misguided, uninformed electorate. That's who they care about. They only care about pandering to their electorate. They do not care about the Constitution of the Illinois or the United States. They don't care. They don't care. And they got all the power because they gerrymandered the hell out of the frickin' districts. They own their electric, and their voters are not informed. And that's the most polite way I can say it.
Yeah.
Without going to the S word.
I understand all that, but that's where, the courts are the last vestige of refuge for us. And we've done pretty well there.
Yes, you have. Yeah.
And so we've gone to the Supreme Court 4 times. We have prevailed. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep arguing within the system. And we're going to use whatever tools at our disposal within the system to sit there and get and win. And just like Madigan and Company, Harmon et al., John Cullerton, and back in 2013 were dragged, kicking and screaming to pass a carry law. You saw the look of some of your colleagues' faces on the floor as to how sick they were to have to deal with that.
Yep.
Well, that was just the beginning.
And they played games for months. Remember those 27 individual amendments that we had to vote on? It was just garbage. I finally went to caucus and said, why are we even participating? Just sit back and watch the show. Don't even participate. Why are you even forget it?
To be honest with you, I've thought this whole thing, I think it's a disservice to the victims to drag them around and use them as the political pawns that they're being played for.
Yep.
I mean, this is like Rome, bred in the circus. That's in my mind what they have been going about doing this. I mean, if they were really serious about this, they would have a hearing. They could bring in all the anti-gun lawyers, the attorney general's people, anybody you want. I will sit on the other end of the table, and we can go through the 4 Supreme Court decisions and argue them up and down for 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, ad nauseum, to sit there and say why you're wrong. If you really want to have and get a grasp, we'll do this as a committee of the whole in the House. I'll put a suit and tie back on. I might even trim my beard up a little bit.
Okay, but, here, Todd, let's leave it at this. You tell your 150 folks to stop voting for the Democrats. Tell them to stop it.
Believe it or not, there's more 150 guys voting Republican than you think about.
Okay, I hope so.
Let me tell you something. Some of the guys I run with are some of the most hardcore trades guys in the world. Iron workers, carpenters, electricians, and every one of those guys voted Republican in the last election.
Okay, so their leadership though needs to stop funding Democrats because they don't represent.
On the other half of that, some of the Republicans just need to drop the reason you got that constitutional amendment was because there are certain Republicans that won't let go of screwing with prevailing wage and right to work, because as a union I have nothing more than a high school diploma in terms of formal education. And because of being a tradesman and operator, I lived in DuPage County for a majority, for the first half of my life. And I lived there and I was able to raise a family as a guy with nothing more than a high school diploma because we made an honest wage at an Illinois rate for Illinois work. My son is now going into the trades because he's finding out that it's a better way to go without having a lot of college debt.
I am 100% behind getting more people into the skilled trades. It's absolutely phenomenal what you can do. And I'm all for that, Todd. I'm all for that, but we'll have a further discussion on the other issues. Thank you so much. You are an expert. You're a treasure to Illinois, especially on the Second Amendment. We really appreciate you still being in the fight, even though you're technically retired. Appreciate your.
I'm getting sucked back into this one. You know what? I'm doing it. You might have heard my grandson in the background. I'm doing it for him.
Good.
I'm doing it to make sure that when I'm not around anymore, they still have something, that I didn't waste 30 years of my life fighting for something that somebody else is going to flush down the toilet. And that's the big thing.
Well, that's why we're in the fight too. So great talking with you. You and I share a common birthday, which is also kind of fun as well.
Yeah.
Todd, again, give everybody your YouTube site or your website that you want them to go where they can listen to you and subscribe.
It's Freedom's Steel on YouTube, 'S. When you see the picture of the bulldozer at the masthead, yep, you found the right place. That's me. You can see me out there. There's Todd's 2A Talks which are my 2A stuff. The channel was originally born out of me building 20 new ranges out at the gun club and just kind of doing some YouTube stuff on that. So we'll have both of it, but
Yep.
show up. We appreciate it. Hit that like, subscribe, smash the alert button, and it all helps us out.
Terrific. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast, The Real Story with Jeannie Ives.